When I think about what it means to be a mother, a wave of emotion comes over me. I'm filled with love, joy, happiness, and fulfillment. But there are times when I wonder, am I doing this right? And am I really the best mom for my child? I question everything, and I don't give myself enough grace. But I truly believe we are not given what we are not equipped to handle. As is the case with my first guest, Savana Beal, a mom, a singer-songwriter, and a founder of a nonprofit organization. Savannah's motherhood journey is unique. The mom of two boys, one born with a rare genetic mutation that has made Savannah an active advocate for children with disabilities. With a heart of gold and a voice of an angel, Savannah is here to share her story and journey through motherhood. This is We Need to Talk Motherhood, Part 1. Savana Beal, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I just realized it's almost going to be 20 years, I
Oh
think.
my gosh.
Did I just ruin your day?
Kind of. I
But it's
mean, like
amazing.
16 years.
That's crazy, though.
I know.
I was trying to think when I first met you. I don't know. Was it in did we meet in Belcanto or was it in UCO?
Did you go to Romania?
No, I
Okay,
didn't.
then we met in
But I was in
UCO.
Belcanto that year.
Oh, really?
I just didn't go to, I think so.
Then we met then.
We must have. Regardless, it's been a long time, and I'm glad that we have stayed friends. And I've loved seeing you grow and becoming a mom, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But you have such an inspiring story, and I'm really glad that you want to share it and you're willing to share it with people. You're a mother of two. You are a business owner. You're an artist. You're a wife. You do everything, and your story is one that I know will be very comforting to a lot of moms that are listening that may be in a similar situation, but also just to bring awareness to something that I know is very dear to your heart. But first, I want to backtrack a little bit. And when you were deciding you and your husband, to have kids and add to your family, how did you know that you were ready to be a mom?
Well, I always wanted to be a mom, and like my goal in life was to be able to stay at home with my kids. I always had, aspirations, um, but I always knew that like I wanted to accomplish them before I had kids, because I knew that once I did, I didn't want to. I wanted my kids to be first, and all of those other things to come after that. So there was definitely like a sense of accomplishment in different aspects of my life, in my music, in my with my nonprofit organization, and then also just in my marriage. My husband and I had a really tough first 2 years of marriage, and it was like everything that could possibly happen in a marriage, like a lifetime span, happened in like the first year. And so kind of after that, like working through all of those things, and also like through therapy for myself, therapy with my husband, and just like really, because I feel like we really changed as people during that time. um and so once we kind of got grounded and got our marriage in a really, really good place, um, then we knew that we were ready.
I love that because I think going into parenting, and I'm just, speaking from my experience now, being a newer mom, my daughter's now 18 months, but you really want to make sure that you're also whole because you're taking care of a whole other person.
Hmm.
So if you're not in a good position, there's no way that you can provide for another person. So I love that you guys realized and wanted to get to a good place before you added to your family. So what was your motherhood experience like with your first son, who's now how old?
He's 6.
He's
He
6. Oh
just
my
turned
gosh,
6.
that time went by so
I know.
fast.
He turned 6 in July, and he just started first grade.
So what has that experience been like having a 6-year-old before we get to your second son?
Um, well, I like thoroughly enjoyed being pregnant. I had like pretty easy pregnancy is how I
Mhm.
remember it. Like when I talk to my family members though, they're like, you were miserable and you were sick the entire time, but I don't remember.
You don't remember
I
that.
don't. And I loved like my experience delivering my son. Like I had
Mhm.
I like love I don't know. I loved it with both actually. I had a great experience delivering them. I know like you hear a lot of like horror stories about gi- um, giving birth and like going into labor, and that was not my experience at all. I loved it, and I'm like when I think about having more kids, I'm pretty sure I'm done, but like I miss that
You
whole
missed the
experience. Yeah,
experience. Yeah, yeah. It really is a beautiful thing. And it's funny because I was telling my husband that I was like, "Oh, I miss, this or I miss breastfeeding." He was like, "You hated all of that."
I know.
And I was like, "Well, it wasn't that bad." He was like, "You hated it though." So I think that we it's I think that's a common thing with a lot of mothers that we go
You
through it.
forget.
We're miserable. We complain, we forget, and then we're like, "Oh, but this." So people are like, "No, no, no," because we had to be on the receiving
But
end.
I think we're wired that way for a reason, because if we truly remembered how awful it was, we would never have more kids.
Yeah, we would only have one child. Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. So now your second son, he was born with a rare genetic mutation, and you've been very vocal about that. And I would love for you to just share what that journey was like from when you discovered it to giving birth and now going through therapy to help him have the best quality of life possible.
Yeah, so I had a totally normal pregnancy with Remy. Um, I'm fortunate enough that my insurance covered all of the genetic testing while I was pregnant, just because it did. And so I did all of that. I did that with my first son as well. Nothing came up. There were like random things that came up in me that I didn't pass on, so it didn't matter. But um, totally healthy. He was big, he was measuring big. So I ended up being induced a week early, and he was almost 10 pounds a week early. He was a big baby. But like my delivery was totally smooth. I was like induced in the morning and had him that evening. So it was, it was pretty easy. Um, and yeah, was told he was, perfectly healthy. Took him to the pediatrician, everything was good. The only thing that they kind of noticed was that his head was big. And I actually knew that when I was pregnant, but my doctors would kind of like make jokes about it. It was never something that was concerning. It was just like, oh, he's got a big head, like not a big deal. um and so as time went on, I think around 3 months, my pediatrician, so, they measure their head, they measure
Right,
different body
right.
parts and stuff. At around 3 months, I think it was, our pediatrician was concerned about the the rate at which it was growing. It had jumped
Mm.
in size in a short amount of time, and it had jumped like more than what was normal. And so at that point, he was just like, let's monitor it and see what happens. And it continued to jump rapidly. And so they wanted us to do an ultrasound. And with babies that young, they basically just like do an ultrasound like they do on your belly when you're pregnant, but they do it on their head. And what they were looking for was extra fluid, because a common thing with rapid growth like that is hydrocephalus. He didn't have any symptoms of it besides that. Like usually babies will be lethargic, or, will have delays, or just like not they have other symptoms, and he didn't have any other symptoms. So my husband and I went into it and we're just like, this is ridiculous. Like he's totally fine. He's like a perfectly healthy baby. Like he's gonna be fine. Um they didn't find anything. They found like a little bit of extra fluid, but it wasn't enough to diagnose him
Be
with
alarming in any
hydrocephalus.
way.
Yeah, or to do anything. And if they
Yeah,
do find it, usually they put like a shunt in to drain the fluid. And so they
right.
continued to monitor it. And then I think around 6 months, it did keep growing. Um, they wanted to do an MRI, just to see if there was anything structurally going on. And so we did that, and it was terrifying because with babies, they have to be sedated, like put under full
Mm.
anesthesia. And, like you don't get to go in there with them. It just is really scary.
Especially because 'cause they're so young. I mean, 6 months, I can only imagine, like,
Yeah.
being detached. You're still going through postpartum, like, being
Still
away from them,
nursing.
knowing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, still nursing, all of that. There's so many factors that come into play, so I can only imagine how you were feeling.
Yeah. It was scary. So they did the MRI, and basically what they found was that his brain was like, all of the parts of his brain were big. Um, and they could see that if it kept growing that that could be a problem, but at the current time there wasn't a there was nothing to do about it. It was just that's how it was. The
Yeah.
ventricles were a little bit large, different parts of his brain were bigger, but there wasn't anything to do with it at that time. And so that's when they suggested that we do genetic testing to find a reason as to why his brain was like that. And so at this point, when we started genetic testing, he was almost a year old. Everything just like takes a long
A
time.
really long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so once we did the testing, they did genetic testing on me and my husband and Remy. And which it's kind of cool because they tell you if you have anything that's preventable. So like the breast cancer gene or something like that, if I had that, that would come up and they would tell, they tell you all of those things.
Hmm.
Um, and that took about, man, 4 months to get the results. So,
So I have a question. So from the 6 months up until getting the results, how much growth had Remy's brain had and head like circumference? Because you had 6 months and then the year mark. So how much what growth was there from that point?
um, I mean, multiple inches. I don't know
Mm,
exactly, but let's say, I want to say his head was like 14 inches when he was born. And it's now like they do everything in centimeters. So I
yeah.
think now it's like 23 inches.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's a lot for it to grow.
Yeah.
Usually they grow just like a
Yeah.
few inches in the first 3 years.
Yeah.
So we got the results, after months of waiting. And the waiting is always the hardest part
Of
because
course.
basically in that time, what our neurosurgeon told us was that, even though we don't have answers, there are things that you need to look for in a brain that's growing this fast. And what can happen is essentially the brain can start to outgrow the skull. And when that
Mm,
happens, the brain can push down on the top of the spinal cord. And if that happens, they could die instantly. So we didn't
mm.
have answers. We didn't have a diagnosis, but we knew that sudden death was like, could happen, and was like a side effect of this overgrowth.
How do you navigate your day to day knowing that that is a possibility?
It was really hard. I mean, I felt like, and I think a lot of things in my life added to this too, partly just living in Los Angeles and the fact
For sure.
that if there was an emergency, knowing that I couldn't get where I needed to go in a timely fashion because of traffic and because of where I lived. Because at that point,
Mm,
it was like if Remy spikes a fever, if he starts to get lethargic, he goes straight to Cedars, So, um, it was like, and knowing that I had a short amount of time to get there or that he could possibly die, it was like, it's going to take me an hour and a half to get there from the valley, It's like,
yeah. Yeah.
so that added a lot of stress. Um, I don't know. I just felt like I lived in a constant state of panic, but at the same
Yeah.
time, I had Wade. And fortunately, like we have a lot of, my whole family's in LA or Orange County. So our family was around us and super helpful. Um, my church at the time knew what was going on and they offered a lot of support. And we felt supported. And I think that that's probably what got us through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it was really hard. And every little thing was just like, is it like what's happening, and
Right. Of
anytime, like
course.
even if he just got sick, like I remember the first time he was admitted to the hospital, he was throwing up and they took him straight into the ICU, and he just had, he was just sick. Like there was nothing wrong, he was just sick, but like he wasn't allowed that. It was any time he
Yeah.
had to be monitored or ended up having to get another MRI or whatever. um so yeah, it was really traumatizing.
I can't imagine that. So then you get your results and what is shared with you?
Yeah, so we get the results and we meet with the geneticist. We were referred to one, couldn't get in with him. And so they're like, but you can see this other one. And it was at Cedars too. And I'm so fortunate that it worked out that way because he was doing research on the mutation that Remy ended up having. And so he told us
Mm,
that he had, um, the mutation is called an AKT3. And um, The disease that they diagnosed him with is called megalencephalic polydactyl polymicrogyria hydrocephalus syndrome. And those are essentially like the four major symptoms that come along with this. Um, and I just remember sitting there being like, asking these questions like, well, first of all, is it terminal? Is how long is he going to live? Like, what is his quality of life going to be like? Is he going to walk? Is he going to talk? And every single answer was, I can't answer that for you. Every
Mm.
single one. Like, there was no, we had, I just remember leaving and being like, we have zero answers, except that, like, he could be fine, but we just don't, like, we don't
You
know.
just don't know.
And it turns out that there were less than 60 cases of this disease in the world. And so they just really had no answers. And just because of the way that, well, genetic testing is so new,
Yeah.
and the way that it's constantly changing, they had only discovered this mutation like not that long ago. So they just didn't even have the research to really answer any of those questions. They didn't have patients that were really old enough to give us like a prognosis or a lifespan because they were all young, so they
Yeah.
just didn't really know. So I just remember leaving and being like, this is insane. Like, they didn't tell us anything except
Mhm.
that we have to, you know, have an MRI every 6 months and bring him back if something bad happens. But fortunately, like I said, the geneticist was doing research on this mutation, and also our neurosurgeon. He was incredible too, and he was like one of the leading researchers with this mutation and other ones like it. And he was like one of the first doctors to do brain surgery on a baby in utero. Like, he was
Mm.
incredible. So we at least knew that if something did happen, we were in like the best hands, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So cut to now.
So now he's 3.
He's 3 years old. And
Yep.
so what have the last 3 years looked like for you as a family?
We've really just been navigating and like dealing with the reality of who our child is. Um,
Mm.
I remember when we got his diagnosis, like, it didn't register or really click that I was like, we have a child who's disabled. Like, that's a reality of the situation. Like, we're going to be navigating, you know, this life, the special education system, um, forever.
Mhm.
And that, I kind of think, was an answer that I wanted early on that no one would give
For
me.
sure.
You
For
know,
sure.
I wanted
Yeah.
them to say, like, is he going to recover from this and be typical, as in this world we call kids without disabilities? Or
Yeah.
is he going to be disabled? Like, is this what his life is?
Yeah.
And that was something that we had to just kind of figure out on our own. And I think doctors, they just don't want to answer that because I think that they're trying to preserve your emotions. But also, I just think that like, there could be any outcome. And so they don't want to give you an answer
Right.
because,
Right.
like, just because it's been this way for so many kids doesn't mean it's going to be this way for
It's gonna be that way
yours.
for him. Yeah.
So
Of
it's just really
course.
hard to get answers. And so I think once
Yeah.
we accepted that, and I realized that, right after we got his diagnosis, I tried to get him in because he was one. He didn't start walking until crawling until he was 11 months old. He wasn't walking. He wasn't talking at all. And so we knew that there were some delays happening, which we
For
didn't
sure.
know up until like 7 months old because he seemed pretty
Mm.
typical. Um, and so um, I had to figure out, and I just remember like when Wade was a baby, I was in a mommy and me class, and my teacher was like, you know, early intervention in the state of California is free until they're 3. So if there's anything that you see that you want to get evaluated, like anything, just do it before they're 3. And
Mm.
so I just like looked into the early intervention system and tried to enroll him, and that in itself took 6 months to get a phone call, like a returned phone call from the
Wow.
state. It was insane, and I called all the time, like all the time, just like trying to get an answer, to get him evaluated in the
Yeah.
system. because you have a
Yeah.
limited amount of time for them to do it. And
And
so
for it to be free.
exactly, for it to, yeah,
Yeah,
for it to be free, which like we would have given up everything to give him what he needed,
for sure. For sure.
but um yeah, it's freaking expensive. And like, and also like, I am like, he deserves those resources. Like he is one of those kids
Yeah.
that need it, and he deserves to use it regardless of if we can afford it or not.
100%.
Um and so once we finally got into the system, it was great. And the evaluations were thorough, and they basically evaluate the child and then they put them in the therapy that they think that they need. And so he qualified for this program at this therapy center in Los Angeles that was like 20 hours a week, and it was a group program. And it was kind of like a preschool class, but it wasn't preschool. It was like a small group, and the parent stays with them the whole time. Um,
Yeah.
but it would cover occupational therapy, physical and speech therapy, and also like behavioral therapy. And basically, because his diagnosis is so rare, he qualifies for everything. Um, and so I was so excited about that. And then,
Yeah.
so he was supposed to start in April of 2020. And then in March, COVID happened. And so he didn't get any of the therapy that he needed, really, in the beginning. And they tried to do it over Zoom. And like, he was, I don't know, 18 months old. And
Can't imagine that would translate very well over Zoom too.
no. And then finally, when he was able to get in person therapy, he was doing speech therapy, and the therapist had to wear masks, and it was just like
Yeah.
I get it. Because on the other hand, on the other side of that, like he is medically vulnerable, so he needs to be protected. But also, like, it was such a losing situation for him, because how do you learn to talk when everyone's mouths are covered, So navigating therapy through the pandemic has been like a whole other that's a whole other podcast we could do, man.
I can only imagine how difficult that is because even with schools, navigating that over Zoom cannot be easy. So trying to do speech therapy over Zoom.
And with a baby.
Exactly. With somebody that age, that's got oh my gosh. But for you, at least from the outside looking in, it seems like you are handling this with so much grace and so much strength. And anybody that is raising a child with a disability, you never go into parenthood thinking that that's going to be what your journey is.
Yeah.
And I know that with you, I can ask you this question from a spiritual standpoint, but what were your conversations with God like when you were going through this process?
Man, I felt a lot of I don't know if guilt is the right word, but I remember when I was pregnant with Remy, praying that he would look like me, and being
Mm,
like, Lord, like, just let him have like my eyes, or just let him look like me, because Wade looks exactly like his dad.
yeah.
And I really wanted a girl. And so I was like, at least just like let him look like me. And so I remember when he was diagnosed being like, I didn't pray. Like, I didn't pray for a healthy child. Like, I prayed for him to look like me. Like, that is
Yeah.
so messed up and dumb. And so I put a lot of just like pressure on myself, and
Mm,
not responsibility, but I think what I was doing is just trying to find an answer, and trying to find like a reason why this was happening. And it's easy to just
yeah.
put the blame on yourself, because there is no reason.
Right.
Looking back over my life, though, the things that I have always cared about, um, I've worked in special education. When I was in high school, I was an aide in the special education classes. I spoke at the funeral of one of the students that I was an aide for that passed away. And like, there are things that I've done in my life that when I look back, even with my nonprofit, the kids that we've worked with, vulnerable people, it's like, okay, I'm equipped for this. Like, as much as I don't want it, honestly, and as much as I wish this wasn't, like, if I'm being completely honest, as much as I wish this wasn't my story, um, I'm equipped for it.
Yeah.
And so I get it. Um, and I'm trying my best to like walk this journey with grace, people always tell me I'm strong, but I'm like, I don't okay, thank you. But like if you were in this situation, you would be too. Like
Right.
I don't have a choice. Like I have to go take him to the hospital. I have to do these things for him to have any quality of life. And
Yeah.
so if you were in this situation, like you would probably be doing the same thing. So like I appreciate that sentiment, but at the same time, it's like, especially as a mom, you just do what you have to do, you
Yeah, of
know?
course.
And I
Of
think that
course.
I've developed strength, but I don't feel strong all the time. I just feel like I'm just doing what needs to be done. Um and so now I mean my prayers are obviously different. I'm so grateful for Remington. Like he's brought so much joy, and this is one thing that like I'm seeing the qualities and the gifts that God has instilled in him. Like he brings so
Yeah.
much joy to people's lives. He's never met a stranger. Like you meet him, he looks like a mini Santa Claus because he's got bright blue eyes and he's just laughing all the time. We call him our
Oh.
joy bomb, and he just like brings sunshine to the world. And I'm grateful that I get to experience that, but I'm also grateful that I get to be somewhat of a vessel to bring him and use him in this world. And I think too, that's why I don't feel an obligation to share his story. Um, but I do feel like he would be okay with it.
Right.
Um, and I also just feel like there's a lot of hopeless people trying to navigate this world. And I know that I felt super hopeless. Um, and he brings me a lot of hope and a lot of joy. So I know that he can do that for other people too.
As moms, we often feel, regardless of what our situation is, there are always moments where we feel like we're failing
Hmm.
or we're not doing a good job or we're not the best mom. When you've had those moments of doubt about yourself, how do you kind of rescue yourself from those thoughts? What do you remind yourself of, or what gets you back on track to be like, no, I am the right mom for these kids and I'm the best mom for them possible?
Yeah. Um, I definitely feel a lot of times when, especially right now, when Remy is like very vocal, but he can't talk. Um, and so I feel like I'm failing sometimes at getting to really know him. And I feel
Mm,
like I'm not having the opportunity to really know who he is, and to like know what his wants and needs are. I'm guessing and I'm doing the best that I can to like, you know, make sure that his needs are met. But like, do I really know what his favorite food is? Or do I really know what scares him? Or do I
mm,
really know, you know, who he loves or what he likes? Like, no, I think I do. Um, and so I think those are the moments that I feel the most hopeless or the most like a failure.
yeah.
And I just
Yeah.
have to remind myself that he loves me so much. Like he loves me so much and he shows me how much he loves me. And if I ask him for a hug or a kiss, like he will give it to me and not stop. So I know that he trusts me, and I know that he loves me, and like I do have a relationship with him and I do know him.
Mhm.
Um there's also times when I just lose my shit, honestly, with him
Yeah.
because I'm with both of my kids, but um he screams at me all the time. And I get so
Mm,
frustrated that I'm just like, what do you want? Like I don't know. I don't know what you
yeah.
want. And I just like have to stop and remind myself of like he doesn't even know what he wants.
Yeah.
Like he's a toddler and all toddlers scream and they all think that they know and they don't. Like they're
100%.
all crazy,
Yeah.
and we're all just guessing. Like we're all
Yeah.
guessing and just doing our best. So like yes,
Yes.
Remy has his differences, but at the same time like he's just like a typical 3-year-old.
Typical toddler. Yep.
And
Yep.
so I
Yep.
just have to step back and give myself grace too and be like, okay, how did I do this with Wade? Like it doesn't have to be that much different, you know? Yeah, so I don't know. I also give myself breaks. Like I allow myself to turn on a movie for him, and I
Yeah.
allow
Which
him
is
to watch
important.
the
Yeah.
iPad when we go to a restaurant sometimes just so I can eat a meal, and I give
Yeah.
myself grace in those areas, and I navigate the judgment and I take it and I don't care. but we allow my husband and I both like allow ourselves to do those things with him
Good.
just
Good.
because it's for our own sanity too, and
Yeah.
we have to
And it's
be
what works right for you,
yeah.
Like, and that's the other thing that parents have to realize. Cause yes, there's going to be always judgment no matter what you do, right?
Yeah.
But you have to know that it's your family unit, it's your dynamic, and it's what works for you.
Yeah.
And don't let anybody tell you any differently.
Yeah.
How is the dynamic with Wade and Remy?
It's interesting. Um Wade wasn't thrilled to be getting a sibling in the first
Mm,
place. um I think that it's difficult. He has a lot of love for him and he shows a lot of love to him. He has expressed that he is sad that he can't really play with him, or like when we go places, he's not like we went to the fair the other day and like Wade was riding the rides by himself cuz like Remy is too scared and things like that
yeah.
he we were all kind of expecting him to do with his sibling at this point, and he's not able to. And so I think Wade gets, you know, misses out a little bit. I don't think he notices it too much until he sees other kids with their siblings, and now he has a lot of friends who have siblings the same age as him, and so he kind of sees what he's missing. Um, and he gets frustrated with Remy because Remy still doesn't like, Wade. He doesn't like play with you. He kind of still is doing parallel play, and
Hmm.
so he'll just like come up and smash Wade's Legos or just like
Mm,
not
yeah.
he's not fully aware of like boundaries or anything. And so that's
Right.
frustrating. But on the other hand, Wade is super inclusive. Um, there's a bunch of kids in our neighborhood and they all love Remy and Wade, was very open to letting Remy play with them as much as he can. He's super protective of him. And he
Hmm.
also really understands the diagnosis as much as a kid can. And he
As you can.
explains
Yeah.
he explains it to people and he'll say, Remy he has like a disease in his brain and he's okay, but we have to be gentle with his head and different things like that he'll explain to people. And so um I think like when they're older, I think Wade's just going to be so much of a better person because of his relationship with Remy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't obviously he doesn't know that now, but just me as his parent, I can see the ways that having a sibling like Remy has changed him and
Yeah.
made him grow up a little bit too, be a little bit more responsible, and those aren't bad things.
At all.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so we're navigating that too. My husband and I were just talking about this. Like, I think we're at the point where we might like down the road Wade will be able to invite a friend on a vacation or something, so
Mm,
he can have
yeah.
someone to
Yeah.
do things with, or like when we do go to the fair, he can bring a friend, or when we go
For
do
sure.
things, like he can have someone, to do some of those things with, because Remy's not always going to be that person. And that's okay.
Absolutely. And I love that you see the future for Wade in terms of growth and just how he'll interact with people and how he'll treat people. I
Yeah.
think it is a beautiful lesson to start and learn at home.
Hmm.
But looking over your entire motherhood journey with both of your sons and looking at Savannah pre kids, how do you feel you've changed and grown?
Oh man, I think looking back at my life, I don't I wasn't like a super selfish person, but um I've always like, been super service oriented, but I
Mm,
never really knew what it meant to serve your family, and that wasn't something that I not that I didn't have the opportunity to do, but didn't really want to take that opportunity to learn.
yeah, yeah,
um and so I've really learned like what it means to serve your family, and for that to be your like that's kind of turned into my calling. I've always been
Yeah.
outwardly focused in terms of that sense. Um, and now this is like I don't want to sound super churchy, but and say like this is my mission field or something, but it is my ministry.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. This is your purpose right now because before you were doing, your art, your singer, songwriter, all of that, but now your path has shifted a little bit. So this is your purpose in this moment.
yeah. And also allowing myself to have seasons, and knowing that
Yeah.
like just because I thought I would be somewhere, my life would look a certain way
Yeah.
at this point in my life, just because it doesn't look like that now, or there's dreams that I haven't accomplished, it doesn't mean that I can't still accomplish them.
Amen.
And I'm
Yeah.
also learning to like not listen to the world's standards of what it means to be a woman or, you know, a singer. That just because I'm not at a certain place now doesn't mean that just because I'm in my 30s, it doesn't mean that I can't do it at some point.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's something that I'm really starting to believe. That like this right now is where my focus is and where it has to be. But it doesn't mean that my life is always going to be this way. It doesn't mean that Remy is always going to be this dependent on me. And it doesn't mean that I have to give up my dreams and aspirations for my life outside of my family.
Well, I think that you are doing an incredible job. And I love the perspective that you have about where you are in your journey. And I just want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing because it is really beautiful to witness. I would also love for you to share, are there any organizations or places that are doing research that maybe we could support or I could share with my listeners as well?
Yeah, there's actually not a lot of honestly anything with my son's specific disease, but there
Hmm.
is the Rare Disease Network, an organization, and they do a lot of awareness for kids that have rare diseases. And it's a good place for people, for parents like me who don't really know where to turn when their kid is
Mm,
diagnosed. There's somewhat of an online community there on Facebook and on Instagram. Um, and so I think that's a good place to turn. I sometimes get like question my question whether or not like how much to share about Remy's story. And then I
right.
remember when he was diagnosed like being so desperate for someone
To
else that was
find a
going
similar
through what I
story.
was going through. And I
Yeah.
remember like searching
Yeah.
hashtags on Instagram and being like, well, what about this? What if I put this in? And I found that in the Rare Disease Network. And so I'm trying to, obviously with dignity share his story, but just try to be someone that like can share some information so people know where to turn. And I have had people reach out because of that too, which has been nice. But
Yeah. Yeah.
if I find anything else, I'll let you know.
Yes, please. No,
For my
please
own
do, because I
sake too.
definitely want to support you. Yes, absolutely. Definitely want to support you. And can you let everybody know where they can follow you just to keep up with you and your family story?
Yes, so you can follow me at Sing Savannah on Instagram.
Awesome. And she's a beautiful voice. And I think is your Lullaby album on Spotify or iTunes?
Both. Yep.
Awesome. Please go check it out. I have a copy. I love it. It's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Savannah, thank you so much for sitting down with me and sharing your story. You are an inspiration, and I know so many people will be moved hearing from you. And to
Thank
the
you.
listeners, make sure you follow Savannah and subscribe, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you,
Bye.
Malynda.